Welcome to the Allensack National Symposium, Advancing Integrity in College Sport.
We come to you from the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. The topic, mandating a college athlete's Bill of Rights.
Let me introduce the people on the panel. With us on my near left is our moderator, a national award-winning sports columnist for USA Today, who you also know from CNN, PBS NewsHour, ABC News, and NPR, Christine Brennan. To her left, here. To her left is Howard Bryant, himself an award-winning journalist, senior writer for ESPN, and the author of 9 books focusing on race and sport. To his left is Tammi Gaw, attorney, licensed athletic trainer, founder of the Advantage Rule, a consulting firm focused on athlete health and safety. And to Tammy's left is Brendan Cole, who you just met with that last question in the previous session, the athletic director at the Field School, former team captain, and all-conference defensive back at Hampton University. Chris, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Donna. Hi, everybody, and it's good to see so many familiar faces. And
You're not going up there?
No, I think I'm going to stay here. Okay. I want to be closer to you guys. Is that all right? Hey, I'm doing better than Costas. He wasn't even in the room, right? I saw that on Twitter. I did not. I love Bob. Jane, where are you? Somewhere. Yes, we just had a wonderful event with Marist and Jane and honoring Bob Costas. So we've spent enough time with him, haven't we? Yes, in the room. No, teasing, of course, totally understood. And what a, I'm sure it was a terrific session. Bob is one of my heroes and one of the greats of all time. So it is, but it's great to be with you. And yeah, I think I'll just stay here. I mean, we're all in this together. And as Donna mentioned, of course, we've got the Senator Booker, who will be joining us at a time that we believe will be set, but knowing the whims of the Senate and the schedule of senators, he will just materialize behind us, and we will then include him. So it is an honor and a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much, Donna, for all the great work, and thanks to the panelists for being here and spending your time on such an important issue. It's such a vital, crucial time in our nation's history. Lest we miss the forest for the trees, before we get to the issues of athletic injuries and medical care, economic and educational exploitation, it's important to fully acknowledge the intersection of sex, race, and sport. Discrimination on all of that based on sex and race is an athlete's rights issue, obviously, and it is alive in sport as it is in our larger society. That's not news. As we approach the 50th anniversary of Title IX, which of course will be June 23rd, hard to believe, it's upon us. A few statistics. Donna, again, was so kind to pass these along to me. 90% of college and university athletic programs are not fully complying with Title IX. 90%, 50 years later. My colleagues at USA Today had a groundbreaking investigation last month. And basically, the headline was, for every $1 spent on men's programs in the football bowl subdivision, Division I, the top programs, every $1 spent on men, 71 cents is spent on women. College female athletes are annually shortchanged, then, you add that all up, $1 billion in athletic scholarships annually. Athletic departments are spending $162 million less recruiting female athletes than they are recruiting male athletes. And female college athletes receive 148,000 fewer participation opportunities than their gender equity entitlement. So we have a ways to go. Issues of race often are less transparent and often purposely hidden. Athletes of color are overrepresented in football and men's and women's basketball and underrepresented in most other NCAA sports. Full scholarship athletes are required to be full-time students, yet 52% of Division I men's basketball players, 38% of D1 football players, and 38% of D1 women's basketball players will not graduate. They will not receive the meaningful education they were promised when they were recruited. 95% of D1 men's basketball players, 80 to 90% of the football players, and 60% of women's basketball players were specially admitted to predominantly white higher education institutions and most likely were placed in less demanding majors and courses to keep them eligible for athletics. Among those roughly 28,000 full scholarship D1 athletes, less than 350 will actually be selected. You know these stats. Less than 350 of the 28,000 will actually be selected in the NBA, NFL, or WNBA draft. And there are times when sport collides with racism in our society. The reason the slide behind me has been displayed for these several minutes is because several weeks ago, I'm sure you heard about this story, but several weeks ago, the women's lacrosse team of Delaware State University, which of course is an HBCU institution, was stopped in Georgia on their way home from their last game of the season. As team member Micah Lambert stated, a bus full of girls of color and a black bus driver stopped by the police. Police came on the bus, informed the students they would be checking their luggage for possible narcotics, told the driver to open the luggage compartment. A canine dog and 6 officers conducted a search. Players witnessed the police tossing underwear and feminine products from the luggage. Players remained calm and respectful throughout. The players took these photos that you're seeing and a video they posted on YouTube. They released these records, of course, to the media. They participated in every media session, an interview that was requested. They asked their institution to take action. Yesterday, they met as a team, and we are so fortunate here today to have several representatives of that team with us. I'd like to, I would like to definitely introduce all of them. If you want to, when I say your name, if you'd like to stand, please. The coach of the team, Pamela Jenkins, was a student of Alan Sack, who we are honoring here today. How about that? And I believe we have this right. The players on the team, Dorian Cohens, Sydney Anderson, Caitlin Wilson, Anaya Aiken, and Taylor Steed. Did I miss anyone? No. Excellent. Well, I got to tell you, my source, Taylor, thank you so much. That was huge help. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I want to mention, of course, that as talking about Taylor, we also have with us Drake Group member Janet Blade, Taylor Steed's mom, a chair of the sports management department at Delaware State. Janet? Folks, ladies and gentlemen, they experienced racism, they chronicled the harm, and are doing something about it. We already gave them, obviously, a standing ovation, but could we give them one more round of applause? Congratulations. Thank you for your courage. Thanks for coming to the news media, letting us know what was going on, and obviously, our world is better for that. So thank you. Thank you very, very much. I think, Howard, I'm going to come to you first.
No, not first.
Yes. First of all, we know each other. We've known each other for how many years? A long time. Is Pamela Jenkins, the coach, of course, at Delaware lacrosse team, is obviously an athletes' rights ally. Is that the rule, Howard, or is that the exception in college sport?
Well, one, it's just great to see everybody in person. This is it's been a while, so thank you for having us here. And I think it's a strange thing to give applause for what happened to y'all, but I guess it's appropriate to at least acknowledge that just wasn't right. That's all. I mean, and it's inadequate, but at the same time, and I read that story, and it was just, you shake your head because people are constantly surprised at the norm, and that runs counter to our intelligence. One thing Tammi and I were talking about last night was this very question about who are your advocates and who is speaking for you, and do you have an opportunity to speak for yourself? And in following so much, even in the last panel, and following these stories about this brave new world and where it's going and how it's sort of the Wild West, and you look at the overseer, Dabo Swinney, talking about how it's just chaos and this is going to be chaos and so much chaos. We're already in chaos. It's just a matter of who the chaos benefits. And so to me, what I found most interesting about this and the questions that I really think we need to concentrate on is exactly what you're asking. Who are your advocates? Who are your allies? Do you have an opportunity to be in the room? Tammi and I were talking about this right when I first got here. Who is actually speaking on behalf of the athletes? Where is the union? Is there a union? Obviously there's not. Is there counsel? Are you in the room? Do you have a say? And as we know, when you create something from a blank slate, which is where we're going right now, that becomes rule. That becomes custom. That becomes, to the lawyer, precedent. And those precedents are extremely difficult to break. So when something is being created, you have to be a creator. You have to be part of that creation. Otherwise, you are inheriting something that you had nothing to do with, something you had no say on. And there are so many people in the game right now, in this industry right now, who have an opportunity to say something. The question is, are they going to be given the keys to get into the room? And so we spend a lot of time, I think we were talking about this a couple days ago. A story just came out 2 days ago that I think Duke filed Mike Krzyzewski's compensation for 2020 at $13.4 million. And we're talking about fairness, and we're talking about imbalance, and we're talking about, oh my goodness, what would happen? This is already chaos. And so I've been asking the question in the stories that I'm working on now and the stories going forward, coach, friend or foe? And where are they? And we spend a lot of time talking about the car dealership. We spend a lot of time talking about who's going to compensate. We spend a lot of time talking about the athlete. But we need to spend a lot of time talking about the coach, because the coach, to me, is the single most powerful element in college sports, the ones who have actually made the most money out of this brave new world, and the ones who actually, to me, seem to be the most threatened. And to me, if you're the most threatened, maybe you're not an ally. Maybe we need to hear more from them and to be a lot more circumspect of where they fit in this entire new system that we're about to enter.
Brendan, I'll go to you next. As someone who spent 5 years as an accomplished D1 athlete at Hampton University, following off of what Howard said in this conversation about the place of athletes in our world and how we value student athletes and what is happening to them, and also a landscape that is shifting by the minute in ways good and bad. Can you give us a picture of really the reality of this experience? Were you a victim or a beneficiary of college athletics, or is it a little bit in between?
I guess I'll take the easy answer of a little bit in between. But I also went to Hampton University, as I said earlier, so I had a very different experience than a lot of my friends who went to a UVA or Virginia Tech or a University of Maryland. So, at HBCUs, most HBCUs, the head coach isn't just pulling in $13 million like Coach K. So our head coaches, there's a different relationship. So you speak to your assistant coaches a lot who are making, $60,000, $70,000 on a one-year contract, can't buy a house because they don't know if after that 1 year they'll be gone. So you start to empathize with them in a way, right? And so you get into this space, and as a team captain, you start to understand, whoa, if I don't produce, my coach gets fired, and his daughter, who I was just eating with, doesn't have a place to live. So now you tie that into your self-worth, right? So it's back to the friend or foe conversation, because at the same time, you have this empathy for this coach who also will replace you and tell you, hey, we're taking your scholarship next year, good luck. And now his daughter's eating food with somebody else. And so it's this weird dynamic you're caught in, to where I was telling somebody last night at dinner, you get to college and you have one goal as a Division I college athlete at my university. The one goal was to please my coach. My coach held the keys to everything. Nick Saban has a quote where he says, somebody said he said this, just to say that out there, but he said, I can always get these kids to do what I want because I got what they want. I got the ball. I have the ball. If I have the ball, I control everything, because that's how you feel. When you get there, you're like, okay, I got a scholarship. I want to produce. I want to make my coach happy, and that's going to make me happy. Him being happy makes me happy. But you don't even know what your happiness is. Your whole happiness is you don't know what his happiness is. So you're just lost in this weird place of waking up at 5 a.m., getting on the field, practicing, going to class, trying to get treatment, things like this. And as I was saying the other day, we had 3 physical trainers for our team, right? We had one head athletic trainer who took care of just football. And then there were 2 other ones who dealt with basketball, lacrosse, whatever. But we had nobody to help us with our mental health. Not one person. Not one person. So you know who becomes that therapist for you? Your coach. You know who you go to, who you call at night when you're going through something? Your coach. And you know what that coach does? Tell his staff. Now you might hear a little joke at practice. You might hear something about what you just told your coach in confidence from another coach. And so it just ruined, like, you get to this place to where I feel as though I lost who I was. All I became, and coaches will always say, it's about the name on the front, not the name on the back. It's about the name on the front, not the name on the back. Team first, team first, team first. And yes, that is true, but you can forget who that name on the back is. You become the name on the front. But what happens is when you graduate, that name on the front is no longer there. All you have is the name that was on the back, which you have no type of tie or an understanding of what that name means. And so you find yourself in that place, and then you graduate. So to circle it back around, I wasn't a victim of necessarily my college coaches. I think my college coaches were a victim of the system of what college sports are. Win or get fired, right? And it always rolls downhill. So he's win or get fired. So he's looking at you like, either help me win or you get fired, right? I'm gonna fire you before I fire myself. So I think it's just the system within itself that is the abuser. I think the coaches get abused. I think the players get abused. I think the trainers get abused. And I think NILs and things of this nature are the right step. But as he was just saying, it's a blank sheet. And in the music industry, I studied a lot. I remember when they first started making millions of dollars, right? They're signing these 360 deals. Everything's great. I'm making millions of dollars. 20 years later, they're broke. And they're all like, these were the worst deals ever. So I think we have to be very, very, very careful in this time period. Yes, an athlete can make $20,000. Hey, we'll give you $20,000. Post us on Instagram. You're with us. And then you find out later that $20,000 was really worth $20 million. And now you're out back. So that's why I'm here today. And that's kind of my answer.
Thank you, Brendan. Thank you. Tammi, I want to go to you as a licensed attorney and also athletic director, which is a rarity, I believe, in our world. You're hearing, of course, as we talk about an Athlete's Bill of Rights, we'll hear from the senator on that. We're hearing pieces of this very important conversation puzzle, if you will, putting it together. And of course, health, well-being, insurance, of course, Brandon just mentioned mental health as well. All of this is a part and parcel of the same conversation, right? And you are so uniquely qualified to kind of give us that view. What is if you look down at it from, 10,000 feet, where are we on the health, welfare of the athlete, that piece of it?
Thank you very much. And I mean, this is stuff I've been working on since the mid-90s, because the answer to that is we are failing it colossally at every level. When I started working on it, the thing that struck me, even in my early 20s, as being problematic was that we were seeing former athletes. I worked for a Division I institution, and we were seeing former athletes that were coming in the athletic training room to get treatment for long-term effects of injuries that they had sustained while they were competing at the university. And that doesn't necessarily mean, some people think that I'm criticizing the medical coverage when that happens. Anyone that's ever torn an ACL could have a completely top-notch reconstruction, full repair, get back to playing, everything like that. You will, 10 or 15 years down the line, develop meniscus issues. If you don't, you're a unicorn, and I want to talk to you later, because it's just the way it is. And so when we're talking about the 90s, 15 years before the Affordable Care Act, what these athletes, not just contact athletes, but chronic conditions, baseball players' shoulders, your cross-country runners' hips, those kind of things are chronic conditions. And they were coming back in, they were being denied coverage by their insurance companies. And so we got them in to be able to see the team doctors and tried to facilitate that kind of access to health care. But here we are 25 years later from when I started working on it, and I was by far not the first person to do this, but you are still seeing understaffed and under-resourced medical teams and staffs at colleges. And I will be very clear, I say this with every single level of sports, from Pop Warner, AYSO, youth sports, all the way through high school and college. If you cannot afford medical coverage, you cannot afford sports. It is full stop. And when Brendan talks about the understaffing at smaller institutions, I mean, we had 26 athletic trainers at OU's football program. But that was back when you could also use student athletic trainers, which is for a variety of reasons, not the way the system works now. And when you have essentially turned over the day-to-day medical care of your athletes to a strength coach, I think the University of Maryland is a prime example of why that failed on every level, human and otherwise, or to the coach. You know, how many times have you heard coaches they're going to a class to learn how to recognize concussions? I had some wonderful coaches. I also had 6 concussions. I did not want a single one of those coaches diagnosing my concussion. Because you know what the response would have been, and it's better now, but not necessarily across the board, is tape some aspirin to it and go back in the game. Like, you want to watch me lose my mind, refer to getting a concussion and a traumatic brain injury as getting your bell rung. You are not the Liberty Bell. But this is what we're talking about with these athletes, and in colleges, they're treated as disposable commodities. So when we talk about the idea of what true and correct medical coverage looks like, I think there should have to be a ratio. Like, if we're going to start from square one, which Howard has said that we are, there should have to be a staffing ratio. There should have to be a certain amount of athletic trainers per certain amount of students. And when people get talking about whether that implicates revenue, non-revenue sports, big teams, small teams, when you're talking about well-staffed athletic training rooms, that works for all of the athletes and all of the divisions, because the same athletic trainers that might work in football in the fall could be working in women's gymnastics in the spring. And so when you're talking about the medical side of it, it is time to start recognizing that for a variety of different reasons, college sports is at the mercy of health insurance in this country. And when I talk to my friends internationally, college sports is a uniquely American proposition. Yeah, I talk to my friends and family over in the UK, and they look at me like I asked my dog to do math. They do not understand the concept of how college sports has a grip on everything. And when you add that on top of health insurance cost in a system where a bean counter can tell someone, athlete or otherwise, that a doctor's recommended treatment is not adequate or not authorized, we have to erase that, burn it down, start from scratch. And it has to start with the athletes being taken care of, not just physical, and Brendan mentioned it as well. Mental health is sorely lacking. Accountability in the teams, sorely lacking. There is no reason that an athletic trainer should be reporting to a football coach. When you talk about the difference between the athletic model and a medical model, the medical model has to become the new norm. It has to. Because it's, the Upton Sinclair quote that I'll paraphrase. You cannot expect a man to understand something upon which his salary is based on him not understanding. That's kind of what you're looking at. Brendan said it, Howard said it. These coaches are an entity in and of themselves, and they don't always have the best interest in mind for the athletes. Many do, but not always. And when you're talking about that staffing, when you're talking about physical health, you're talking about mental health, we cannot let it go without saying that there has to be representation of the medical staff that represents the diversity of the athletes that they represent. There has to be. Race-based medicine is a thing that still exists. There are doctors in this country who still use spirometers to measure lung output that has a switch between white and black because of connotations based on what people used to think different races' lung capacities were.
Yeah.
We are not that removed from that. And for an athlete to be able to feel comfortable having a relationship with their medical professionals, both physical and mental health, we have to make sure that our staffing and our coverage of these sports, that our members and our medical professionals look like the athletes they represent. That cannot be glossed over.
Tammi, it's. I want to. What you said is powerful. What everyone has said is incredibly powerful, and meaningful, and I see already 100 headlines in stories and pull-out quotes and all that. Just absolutely essential to have this conversation. I want to go back to you, Tammi, and then to both to Howard and Brendan as well. Let's hone in for a moment on mental health, because it has been such a topic, right? Naomi Osaka, Simone Biles. I was covering the Tokyo Games in Japan, and that story, of course, exploded, as it should have. Simone Biles, you combine the pressure on the athletes at any level, obviously high school, college, all the way up, even younger, I'm assuming than high school, combined with the internet. So I was amused and actually horrified at the Olympics when everyone's saying to Simone Biles, suck it up, because I sucked it up, says the 80-year-old ex-football player, who in the 50s or 60s or 70s, of course, there was no such thing as the internet. You weren't getting hammered on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat every day from people you'd never heard of, them attaching themselves to you. So, the internet takes this to a whole new level, and those of us who forget that, well, we forget it at our own peril, because
and that man's leg was probably crooked for the last 65 years.
Well, that, and of course concussions, et cetera. But mental health was like, right, strong and whatever. Thankfully, we're having this conversation. So I'd like to take it a step further with all three of you. Magic wand, Tammi, I'll start with you. If I said you're in charge, let's make it all colleges, D1, 2, 3, whatever. What would you do to solve, we'll just stick with colleges for right now, the mental health crisis at colleges? Who would you hire? How many? What would you budget? I'm kind of just giving you that opportunity. But seriously, give us
a job.
Yeah, give us a sense, and then I'd love the gentleman as well to chime in on that.
I was kidding when I sent Howard a tweet that said we were going to solve college sports in 90 minutes. But
no, but I think people want to hear, what would you do if you could just do it, and you had unlimited budget, or you had a law that told every university they had to spend the money, right? That's what we're here. We can talk about all this all day. How do we actually start solving things?
Well, I think that Senator Booker's, the framework that I've seen for the College Athlete Bill of Rights, touches on a couple of things like that I think we can grasp onto. There should be, I don't know specifically what the ratio should look like. I would have to sit and think about, how many athletic trainers per athletic department. But I think on the budget part, there are ways to use the money that we've been talking about. The NCAA is sitting on a boatload of cash. Is it $1 billion? Is it $15 billion? Pretty soon you end up with some real money, right? It is distinctly possible to set a standard and create a fund that could help smaller schools staff up, because they are going to need to pay professionals, and they are going to need to pay them living wages, salaries that are commensurate with their training. There cannot be one or two mental health professionals for an entire athletic department, because that's not fair to the mental health professionals. mean, they're there to try and help the athletes. So if I could just, go in and lay my mark on everything, starting a fund that can be subsidized through either revenues, through federal subsidies, that kind of thing, that would meet up with Title IX would have to be the start. You have to. It is not difficult to create a staffing model. Anyone who's done a large-scale sporting event knows how to create a staffing model. So you sit there, you look at the numbers, you figure out what that is. You give people a window, 1, 2, 3 years. I would prefer 1, but I've been told I'm unreasonable at that sometimes. And they have to do that. The next thing that has to happen is you have to take it out of the athletic model. All medical professionals need to have a reporting structure that is outside the athletic department reporting structure. That has to be, and that can be done for free now. That I think is the two things I would start with right away.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Howard?
Couldn't I also just say that I just want everyone to know here that you have amazing handwriting. And I am just taking notes. I'm not on my phone. I just didn't bring the notepad, and I wanted to just make a couple of points to what you had said, and I was just writing it down also, what Brennan was saying. I think the thing, when you were talking earlier about about the level, the different tiers, you're talking about community. Exactly. And that level of community has to be reciprocal. And I think one of the things that these coaches have such issues with is that, especially at the top D1 level, is that it's forcing either community or a two-way lack of community. Okay, Bobby Petrino, you can leave after telling me that you were going to be here for 4 years. Now I can leave as well. Exactly. And so we need to decide what we want this to look like. Do we want community, or do we want even less community, where the players are as disloyal to the organization as the organization has been to them? The other point that you made that I thought was fantastic as well was we do live in a base, you want to please the coach. We are talking about a paternalistic industry here. It's always been paternalistic. We are giving you something. We give you a scholarship. We're giving, you're not giving me anything. Exactly. Nothing. I have to earn this, and not only do I have to earn this, I have to earn this every year and repeat earning it. It's not even 4 years. It's 1 year renewables. And then you were also talking about the cliche that we've all heard about, it's always about the name on the front, but do the coaches remember the name on the back? Does the organization remember the name on the back? If you don't remember the name on the back, nobody will. Extremely important. Tammy, the other point that you made as well reminds me of, and in terms of the medical piece of this, it reminds me of when I was covering the Oakland A's. I remember one of the trainers told me, when you're talking about pulling this out of the athletic model, he told me point blank, and I repeat it all the time. My job is not to get you healthy. My job is to get you healthy enough to play. They're not the same thing. And I've been taking that with me for 25 years. Because it is true. I mean, we're looking at the Celtics and the Heat. Robert Williams has this knee injury. He's suddenly ready to go, and then he's got swelling on his knee. He's not ready to go. He was never ready to go. But you have a responsibility as an athlete. You want to be out there. You want to play, and we all understand that dynamic. But the bottom line is there is a very strict line between healthy and healthy enough to play. And so I could not agree more about taking the model away from the athletes. And I think that from the athletic model, the medical side of this, especially the mental health side of it, I think you made another phenomenal point in terms of why don't we talk about these things? Because they're going to cost us. And we know not to talk about things that are going to cost us. So now I walk into the clubhouse or I walk into the locker room and everybody knows I'm having an issue. Mm-hmm. How am I supposed to function when everybody's are they looking at me because I talked to the coach and told him something in confidence? And also, what does that mean then for everyone's ability to count on me? Am I not going to start now? Am I not going to be in the same rotation anymore? You can't be trusted. And it's not to say that you're untrustworthy, it just means you're the wrong person to talk to. I gotta protect myself from you because that's the right thing to do. And I think that I did an interview a few days ago with a young reporter at Santa Clara University who was doing a story on mental health and was asking about these very questions and was asking about, where this came from. And I think it's very important to connect all the dots. I mean, one of the things that we're supposed to do as journalists is dot connect, to explain how these things all connect. And I think it's really important to remember that we are now we're starting a second decade since Trayvon Martin was killed. And since we've seen this revival of the athletes speaking up. Previous to that, we hadn't seen that since the late 60s. And so now when you start taking 10 years of this, from Trayvon to Ferguson to Kaepernick to the WNBA with Maya Moore to the Atlanta Dream out there, on the senatorial campaign, the athletes are speaking, and now they're speaking for themselves on mental health. They are changing the dynamic and the parameters of their lives. So you don't get this, in my opinion. You don't get the Osaka conversation. You don't get the Michael Phelps and the Simone Biles conversation without the rest of that. And so I think it's important to remember that we are in a remarkable decade right now of players and athletes having say. And all of it sort of comes together and it all connects. And I think that one of the most important areas here in the medical side versus the athletic model is extremely important to remember is we still view the mental side as weakness. Mm-hmm. It's not the same as a broken arm. Right. And when we were having this conversation not too long ago about, I don't remember what game it was, somebody missed a couple of free throws, and this conversation was, did you miss or are you weak? Mm-hmm. Who is going to talk about that in a pressurized situation? That if I talk to my coach that I'm having some issues, do I really want you in the game in the last 5 minutes?
Exactly.
So it's extremely important for the athletes to have an outside outlet to keep them from being even more under the thumb of the coach and of the team. They're the wrong people to talk to.
Brennan, I want to get to you in a second, but I think it's important to mention that in addition to what you were just saying, we've had these 3 awful headlines, awful, awful stories, all happen to be women. Stanford, soccer, Wisconsin, cross country, James Madison, softball. All 3 women, great athletes, high-achieving people by all accounts, happy, wonderful people by all accounts, no one had any idea, and all 3 take their own life. Sometimes, and you and I know this best as journalists, sometimes there has to be, I'm going to say the big one, and I don't mean it because these are 3 beautiful lives. I'm not trying to say, oh, that's just a story, but the big one, the awful, terrible thing that hits us, right? Hits us square in the face, that wakes us up. And that's tragic that it takes that on any level, whether it be talking about mental health, talking about steroids in sports, talking about racism. I mean, of course, it's terrible. But sometimes as a nation, we have to be awakened by something really, really bad. So, Brendan, I'm going to ask you, when you hear those horrible stories, and certainly there are more than that, but these 3 have been relatively recent and jarring for many, many people, certainly in those communities. Do you feel like maybe we're getting somewhere, or we will get somewhere on mental health? And then if you want to include your experience, I know you talked a little bit about talking to a coach or whatever, but what is your thought about where we are with mental health specifically with athletes?
Yes, I believe we are starting to make the right steps. I always want to be very careful. I think things become hot topics, right? Just like, racism has been a hot topic for many years, but lately it's been on the forefront and everybody's jumping on it. I think mental health is in the lens. But I think we really, really, really need to hold these universities accountable for implementing plans, strategies, and holding them to that. Like the same way everybody wants to go see, how many of your players on scholarship graduate? Because if not enough, then we put you in, you violate this, you can't go to the bowl game, you can't do this. They need to do the same thing with the mental health. We need to have a measure. How can we make sure these kids are getting the mental health they need? Because I mean, I can hire a therapist for 2 weeks and have every kid meet with them for 30 minutes, and that I fulfill my credit of supporting my players' mental health. Is that what we're going off of? No, I think that there needs to be a department at each university for this. As she said, separating them from the athletics program. And I think you naturally make them, there'll be adversaries, right? And so in college football, if anybody's played college football, I haven't played anything else, so that's what I'm speaking on. It's always a bad thing to be cool with the trainer. You never want to be cool with the trainer. If you're cool with the trainer, you're not cool with the coach. You know how many arguments I've seen of a trainer coming out telling us it's too hot outside, we need to take our pads off, and a coach saying, it's not that hot. And then it's like, well, the turf index is this. Man, well, we'll move to the grass. It's just like, it's not even about, okay, my athletes are hot and they probably need to get in the shade. It's more so about, you're technically wrong, because if I move off of this piece of turf onto this piece of grass, then the heat doesn't go over 99, right? And it's like, it becomes this like childlike game of who, there's a better term for it, but I won't use it, but it's like, we're like, who's the big guy? Like, oh, I can make you stop practicing. Oh, no, you can't. I can practice all day. And it's just this weird fight. And so I think it's huge to have that separation between medical and athletics, because I just feel like it's easy to check boxes. Same way organizations hire a couple people of color and they check that box, right? Nobody comes and checks on those people of colors at that organization. They don't come to check and see, oh, you have 5 black people working for you, 4 of which do landscaping. You have 1 that's a coach, none that are CEOs or anything like that. But you check the box, right? So I think we need to hold people accountable and businesses accountable. And to the point of trying to help it in the college ranks with mental health. So I've seen a lot of kids. We had a coach, we came in freshman year, we had a coach. There were 17 of us on scholarship. Coach got fired in December. New coach came in January. Told a lot of those guys, hey, you don't fit my scheme, things like that. You have 18-year-olds in the office on the phone with their mom and their coach crying because the coach is taking 20% of their scholarship and they have to figure it out. Do I blame the coach? No, like I said earlier, I don't blame the coach. I blame the system itself, right? This system that we're in. So I think that they need to have SGAs, student government bodies, that help interview the next coach. Why can't I have a say-so on who's the next coach here? If I'm a junior, sophomore, or freshman, why does the AD get to just interview coaches and pick who he wants, him and the president? I'm the one that's gonna deal with this coach every day, all day long. Why can't we make up a committee of 8 kids on each team who interview the next coach? We sit in.
It's like community policing, line 1.
Exactly. Okay, you interview with the president, you interview with the AD and his department, and then you interview with the kids. And we all come together and talk to each other. I like him, I don't like her, mix it up. I don't understand why we can't do that. It just makes sense to me, right? The AD hires him and never sees him but once a week on a Sunday to talk about his game plan from that past Saturday. The kids deal with him from 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. So I think that's one way we can help with the mental health, right? Because now I have a say-so in who I'm trying to make happy all day.
Yeah, now you just tilted the balance.
Exactly.
Well, then that's the other piece of it. But what's taking place here is one of the toughest things to do is to maintain the integrity and structure of the building when you take all the pillars out. You're taking the system down. Exactly. That's the whole thing. And the argument here, and I think it was happening in the earlier panel, I think it was Dr. Fry back there, who was talking about language. Language is extremely important. Language is how we communicate. So instead of just saying, well, you can't just do it with words. No, you can't just do it with words, but it starts with words. What words do we use to define what we're talking about? And one of the things that we're talking about here is reform. You're really not talking about reform. You're talking about replacement. Trying to create something else. Because the reforms are always so incremental that there's an opposition to that which keeps everything in place. And the things that you're talking about, it's like when I was at the San Jose Mercury News and all of a sudden they had this new format where the reporters actually were going to interview the job candidates. I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. That didn't last. And so what we're really talking about is, and this is what this panel is all about, this Bill of Rights. You're talking about a fundamental reimagining of what this is. And that is extremely frightening to a lot of people. And one of the ways, the very first things that you do in reimagining is reimagining our language. You know, we don't call women stewardesses anymore. That's not nothing. That matters. All of the different language matters, how we use the words that we are adopting or adapting to describe things. That moves. And then the next thing moves, and the next thing moves, and before you know it, it's unrecognizable as to what it was. And so these are the things that we're talking about. And these are the things that your opposition are going to fight against the hardest. Can you imagine talking to your coach and having the coach doesn't want to talk to the trainer. I mean, the trainers, I remember I cover pro sports and have been covering pro sports for, with Christine as well for as long as, we can remember. There are changes in this just in my career. I remember when I first got into the business, early in the early 90s, if a player's wife was having a baby, you never left the team. Now it's nothing, nobody cares. Oh, his wife's having a baby, good, he's gone for a couple days and life moves on. But back then, that was one of the biggest signs that you weren't a real man. That you were weak and that you weren't focused and you weren't ready to go and the whole thing. I remember when I was covering the A's, the players used to tell me they used to try to have their babies make their babies in January so the season was over. I'm like, what if you won 100 games? Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, the players for years had to, use the schedule because you couldn't miss any games. You couldn't be with your family. But think of how ridiculous that sounds now, and it wasn't even that long ago. So language and how we approach things are extremely, extremely important.
And speaking of language, I think a big part of everything we're saying here is the fact that athletes have found their voice. You alluded to this a few moments ago. I'd like to kind of bore down into it a little bit, dig deeper with all three of you about athletes finding their voice, feeling free to speak out. Howard, you and I have talked about these issues a lot on other panels too, but you've chronicled athlete activists, Muhammad Ali, John Carlos, Kurt Flood, Tommy Smith. Obviously, I've written a book with Billie Jean King. We've all talked to her. We've talked to the women's soccer players, and what a tremendous day yesterday was. That is. Talk about finding your voice, right? They've been fighting that for 30, 35 years, and the big lawsuit in 2019, and the great victory. But what was fascinating to me yesterday is, I'm sure you're all well aware of the basically equal pay now with the women's and men's national soccer teams and the World Cup teams, Olympic teams, what have you, is that it was the men who said, yes, we want to share. And those are Title IX males. They're not their dads and their grandfathers. Those are guys who've respected women since they were born in a different way. They went to their sisters' soccer games, and they weren't lamenting the fact they had to be there. The way that maybe a generation or two earlier, brothers were like, I'm not going to go watch girls' sports. And now the respect is there, and now there's the money. Again, finding their voice, whether that be Megan Rapinoe, Abby Wambach, even going back to Julie Foudy, Brianna Scurry. This has been a generation or two effort. So athletes finding their voice, we're seeing a reawakening. There's no doubt that with Colin Kaepernick in particular, but the WNBA you alluded to, especially when they were all together during COVID, during the beginning of COVID. Obviously, we're still in COVID, but the beginning of COVID, and you had the WNBA and the way they spoke out and the way they protested. The NBA, again, all together in a bubble. They could talk all the time. Howard, I'll start with you. How big a deal is athletes finding their voice, talking about these issues, bringing these things to light? Be it LeBron, be it Megan Rapinoe going after Trump and Trump going after her. Have we ever seen a president go after an athlete wearing the red, white, and blue on foreign soil at that exact moment? Never. And Megan Rapinoe did not back down, and I think I wrote 17 columns on that. It was horrific by the guy the former guy, as I guess we call him, a few blocks from here, and Megan Rapinoe just stood right up to him. So again, Howard, the athlete voice, how big a deal is that in this whole conversation about Athletes' Bill of Rights?
Well, I think it's enormous to a point, based on what happens with it. Is finding your voice great? Is it valuable? And then the Bill of Rights comes, and then the rules are in place, and the athlete didn't have a say into how they were implemented or created in the first place, then suddenly it doesn't really mean that much. And so I think the thing that I find most important when you're looking at whether it was, let's not forget, when the women's soccer team was doing their thing, the women's hockey team, they were going to boycott the Worlds, and they were in the United States. And so everything you get comes from fighting. Everything. They're not handing you anything. And I think one of the things, even in the last panel, that's just so important to recognize is that empires don't retreat. They want more and more and more. And so when Bob was on the screen talking about, well, maybe instead of practicing 60 hours, you can practice 40. You're not going to practice 40 until you get told you have to practice 40. You know, and after what took place in Maryland, there shouldn't be a coach employed in America or in the world that's not going to listen to their players saying it's too hot. And so, but you're not going to get any of that reduction unless you have pressure. Nothing happens without pressure. And so to me, when I hear all of these movements take place, it's always a reminder that the player has to be willing to speak. It's the only way.
But do you feel they are more emboldened now than ever before?
I feel like they're more emboldened, and I think that the players, and I think part of the reason is because of the next panel, the NIL panel, and bless you, and the rest of it in terms of in terms of the shift. I mean, the thing that what is Brandon really talking about? He's talking about the imbalance of power. Like, it drives me crazy. And Andy and I were on the plane yesterday and in the cab talking about this, and we couldn't have disagreed more on some of what we were talking about. But at the same time, I don't believe in chaos as a new thing. It's just a matter of who is going to be profiting and benefiting from the chaos. We're already in chaos. And so what we're seeing here is we're seeing athletes having more and more and more of a say in this, and they have to. That is to me that is the balance. Everything else is just going to be, okay, how do you take this? How do you carve up what we have, and who gets it?
Tammi, obviously you are on the health and medical side of all this with your experience, although as a lawyer you certainly have other experiences as well. The athlete voice, how do you see it implemented and speaking out, and that confidence that athletes seem to have? This new wave certainly stems from the murder of George Floyd, of course. That's what triggered this, which is almost 2 years ago now, which is hard to believe. But anyway, athletes' voice speaking out in terms of the what you know best, which I guess is the health piece.
Well, I think it happens on a lot of levels, not just the safety. And I think there is a certain element of finding your voice, but then there are, I cringe when I hear the phrase "the voice for the voiceless," because unless you're an animal, like an actual physical quadruped, you have a voice. It's just nobody's listening to it. And so there is a certain element of people finding their voice, finding what they believe is important, finding what they decide to speak with. But then there's the element of what can they do with that absent or in spite of gatekeepers. So when Sedona releases a video of the weight room, all of a sudden everybody's paying attention. But she did that on her own. So we are in the midst of sort of a revitalization of activism, which has never gone away. And I will shout out Howard's book, Heritage. You definitely should get it. It's sitting on the table right over there. But the activism is not new. And it will be, individual people will decide what is important to them. And now in the space that we're in, there are ways for them to speak out and engage and get to the public without having to go through the same gatekeepers that they used to.
Well, you just brought up the point before we started about what we saw in Missouri.
Absolutely.
And then the Missouri legislature comes in and tries to make a law banning protest for scholarship athletes. And this is the point about constantly being in a fight.
Yep.
It is great to put that, that baseball cap on signing day, but there is a naturally adversarial relationship to part of this, and it's an appropriately adversarial relationship. And so knowing full well that part of this last decade is inspiring, but you also know that the oppositions are also mobilizing to kill that voice,
Exactly.
to prevent that voice from happening.
And when you brought up Simone Biles, that's a perfect example. She chose to speak on her mental health in a way that she chose to speak on it. And, I mean, anyone who's ever been a woman in sports on Twitter, our mentions are a dumpster fire on a good day. But, as a gymnast who never competed anywhere close to the stratosphere, which please do not think that I am comparing myself to her at all. But what I'm not going to listen to is some, old dude who can't walk across a balance beam without falling off somehow opine on whether or not a young woman should take her literal life into her hands because she can't quite figure out where the ground is. I think it's not your business. Mind yours. Stay out of hers. She did not fail anybody. And she got on. Naomi Osaka did the same thing. They communicated in the way that they chose to do it. And they took control of their narrative in as much as they could before some people lost their absolute minds. But I think that goes to it as well. So it's the fact that athletes are finding their voice in a variety of ways. They are being offered the opportunity in the absence of, or in despite of, resistance, they're being offered the chance to speak about it in their own terms.
Yeah, and this is the reason why, I'm sorry, Brennan, this is the reason why unionization is so important. Whatever you want to call it, however it is you need to be, whatever comes out of this period, if the athletes weren't part of the construction of this Bill of Rights, if they weren't part of the construction of what this new landscape looks like, it will have been a failure.
Exactly. And yeah, I totally agree. I was just going to piggyback a little bit. I always get bothered by the give the voice to the voiceless comment too, because it's like, I don't really need you to give me a voice. I need you to help the ears of the oppressor. Don't focus on giving me a voice. I have a voice. They're not listening to my voice is the problem. So we should always have to. I think we're moving into looking at the problem from top down now than from bottom up. Like, oh, there's a homeless guy on the side of the road. How do we get him rich? No. Why is he homeless? Let's look at let's have a paradigm shift. Let's look at the problem from the other lens. It's not all about just, oh, I need to help you. We all feel good helping people. No, let's figure out why we have to help them in a situation so simple as finding somewhere to live. I just think we have to, and I think it's happening where we're changing the lens of, oh no, how should we really look at this problem? Okay, student athletes aren't graduating from college. Is it because they're not smart enough? No. Let's look at the system of being a student athlete. Why are these student athletes not graduating from college? Not why is that student not graduating from college? Why is our university not allowing this student athlete to graduate from our college? I think we have to start looking inward to those problems instead of looking at them from the bottom up.
Yeah, there was a moment, I don't remember what year it was, one of Loyola's Sister Jean moments. I don't remember which year it was. They always do their thing every March. And I think I was in Arizona, I was at spring training, and I was watching a game, and I think it was West Virginia against Loyola in the tournament. And they're showing all the different graphics for these two teams before they go do battle. And there was a graphic that went up that said that West Virginia is the most traveled team of the tournament, and this was a good thing. And it said they had traveled something like 53,000 miles. And I'm like, when the hell do y'all go to school? Like, when are you physically on campus? 53,000 miles? Who are you playing? What are you playing, Hawaii? I mean, who are you playing? And it just shows you what your job is.
Exactly.
And I agree to a lesser extent, not to what he was saying, and I'll call Bob afterwards and we'll have it out. You should be a fly in the wall for that. But I disagree with the idea that you can't change the language and that there has to be some, clearly there is an athletic mission here. And one of the things about this that has always bothered me, especially when you talk about black body and black brain, the entire pathway, when you think about integration in the United States, came through athletes, right? That's the game here. The game was that you simply being on a PWI campus was going to open up a world for you that was not entitled to you before. Otherwise, when these universities began to integrate, they would have gone to the HBCUs and gotten the chemists and the doctors and the psychologists. But instead, they went and got the football players and the basketball players and the track athletes and the Tennessee States and everything else, trying to pull those athletes away from black universities and putting them on PWIs. But if you're going to take that piece away, then why are you here, right? Why are they here? And so what I'm always sort of concentrating on is that level of travel. And what I found fascinating about that little graphic was this was a graphic that was supposed to be a positive. And this goes to your paradigm shift. Why is it anyone? West Virginia is not an outpost. It's not that far from a whole bunch of universities. Why are you traveling that much? And so this whole model strikes me as, obviously to everyone here, as you were saying, it's broken. It's dead. It's got to change. And so, that piece of it, the reason why I brought up the integration element of it is because the number of people, when you're talking about graduation rates and everything else, who's got the cushion to fail? Right? So this is why I was not happy when Bob was talking about, the functionally illiterate. Who has the better cushion to not make it? That kid who plays for West Virginia is not even given an opportunity to succeed on a college campus because they're too busy flying 53,000 miles to play basketball. You don't even know what they're capable of. And so if this is what the model is going to be, then you absolutely have to reconcile with the idea that that requires compensation, that deserves compensation.
There you go.
Just to address something you said there was a comment made earlier about oh, well, there's a kid here that's a felon. And people were like, yeah, felon. It's like, what does that mean? They don't deserve to go to college because they're a felon? If anything, they need our help more than anybody else, right? That's what I mean by looking at the problems differently. Oh, you have a felon on your basketball team. And what? Why don't you? I mean, he's 16 years old. He stole a Jolly Rancher from Busch Gardens and accidentally punched the cop. What do you
remember Allen Iverson? Well, you don't remember Allen Iverson.
I do. Allen Iverson's actually from Hampton, Virginia, where I'm from.
But you weren't born.
And everybody's looking at the bowling alley incident, and they don't even know what Poquoson, Virginia is, and the history of it. And it's just he's 17. Yeah. And I just we have to remember that these kids are minors. They can't buy a drink at a bar. If all of us in here were caught for something we were doing at 17 and 16 at the wrong time, would probably be a lot of felons in here too, or a lot of us will have different records.
Right.
So I just feel like we all need to remember that and look at it that way. And like I tell people, the Negro League wasn't joined with the MLB because their uniforms were great. No, they went and saw that, oh, this guy just hit the ball 389 yards. I need to bring that over here.
Yeah.
And then the TV deal's rolling, because there was also a comment made about if you remove the top athletes from teams, it doesn't matter. The college will still be, the score is 77 to 75, the games are still exciting. Tell that to CBS, because I can point you to 80 NAIA games that are great games that don't get national television. Why? Because they want to watch the top athletes.
Well, and that's right, and that's a great point. I was thinking about it during the last panel, and it reminded me of the work that we did on PEDs. Remember, whenever you go talk to WADA and you talk to the folks about it, and one of the sayings in the anti-doping community had always been, do you want a fast race or do you want a clean race? And so the question, once again, of who the right student is who is the right person. Can you have a baseline of the legitimacy of who your students are? It reminds me of back in the 80s when John Chaney and the black coaches and John Thompson was that Prop 42, Prop 48 conversation once again. Why are you here? why are you bringing them here? And I can tell you, not from personal experience, because my son failed me in this regard, he doesn't like sports. I was like, do you know how we put food on the table here? Do you know how this operation runs here, son? He's not playing the piano, which I love, by the way. I'm just making a little joke. It's a gigantic piece. I can't play basketball. I'm not good at basketball. I went to Temple because that team was great. I was watching the Owls the whole time. So it is a huge recruiting piece. When was bringing it up earlier about what sports does in terms of the recruiting of all your non-athletes. It's enormously impressive. One of my son's best friend is going to Syracuse. Why? Because on Admitted Students Day, they do it in the Carrier Dome, and he looked around and was like, wow, right? Mm-hmm. I want to be part of a big time, when we were thinking about what school, and he's going to go to UMass, so that's all right, except for football. And Frank Martin's a coach over there now, too, so I like that in basketball. But when we were talking, what's that?
It was a speaker out there.
Yeah.
Are we getting close to the
questions?
senator?
Exactly. Well, we can do that. Is he on?
No, I don't believe
Oh,
so.
well, all I was gonna say was, when we were talking about what schools do you want to choose, and I was the same way, and he's not, because he's not a sports guy, but his friends, the allure of being on a big-time college campus is a gigantic thing. Sure. Of going to games at the big house, right? This is the thing, right? And so you can't tell me that it is inappropriate to factor that into the overall budgets of everything that these schools do.
Oh, absolutely. You go to homecoming, you go to wherever you went to school, and you go to the football game or whatever the homecoming activities are, and then you write the big check to the chemistry department. Because you were a chemistry student or whatever. Clearly, I was not a chemistry student. I'm guessing you weren't either. Maybe Tammi. But and so yes, that check is because they had a great time at the football game, for sure. Even though it goes to the
and they want to associate. Like, one of the things that I can't believe I'm just talking out of school like this, but so be it. One of my son's friends had a choice between this school and that school. I will not name them. And one of the selling points that this school offered over that school was, you're not just making a decision for today, you're making a decision for 30 years from now. And if you go there, they're not going to be in the tournament. When you're in the office, when you're in the office and everybody's doing their March Madness poll, we're going to be on that grid. And that's actually not a small thing. The association, they were making this point, and I was like, did I consider that, or is this kind of clever, right? The lifelong association. You are going to be a member of this family, of this university family, and that you are going to wear these colors with pride, and you're going to be able to leverage all of these things. They weren't talking about academics at all. Mm-hmm. They were talking about the big-time association with this industry of college sports.
If I could just,
sure.
I want to kind of tie two things in, one from each of them. We'd be remiss at the Drake Group if we did not acknowledge the fact that we lost a wonderful colleague a few months ago by the name of Jerry Gurney. And Jerry was, definitely. And in addition to being one of the best humans that I ever met, Jerry Gurney was an assistant athletic director at OU when I was there. And I lived through a couple of different football coaches. I lived through a year of Howard Schnellenberger. So if you want to have any conversations with me about that, see you outside. But one of the things that Jerry did, and I think it ties in things that both Brendan and Howard have said, Jerry fought tooth and nail to require institutions to take responsibility for the academic care of the students that they admitted and the athletes that they admitted. And so when we hear things and talking about like the athletes have failed or who's a legitimate student or anything like that, it is not incumbent on those students or on those athletes they have responsibilities to pursue their own work, but we cannot let the schools get off with having failed these students sometimes not acknowledging institutional problems. As Brendan said, you have to look and peel it back. You cannot expect some people to come in and succeed right away when they have not been prepared, supported. They don't, the schooling, everything
Tammi?
like that. Oh,
Yes, I will cut you off. The
Please
phone's
do.
ringing. We've got everything going on here. Senator, can you hear us?
I hear you.
Excellent. This is Christine Brennan, and we've got our wonderful panel here. I don't know if you can see us. I'd like to make a quick...
I've been looking at you and hearing you. It's a great panel. This is awesome.
Come on down and join us. But you're doing very important work. I just would like to quickly introduce you. Pleased, a man who needs no introduction, of course, but the Honorable Cory Booker, U.S. Senator from New Jersey. At this point, Senator Booker, I'd like to throw it to you and tell us, if you would like, what the major elements of your bill are, and anything you'd like to tell us about your thoughts on this important topic of the College Athletes' Bill of Rights. And welcome and thank you.
Well, first of all, I just want to say, I know there's members of the Delaware State women's lacrosse team. I just want to give them a shout out to handling what is a god-awful situation with such poise and such grace. They're extraordinary. And I know when I was a college athlete, I had run-ins with the police, being pulled over, accused of stealing my car, times where I had guns drawn on me, the fear I had when I was in college from experiences like that. It's just awful that this kind of humiliation is still going on for so many folks. So they, to me, are champions in more than one way. As far as what you all are talking about, look, I played ball, it seems like yesterday, but played in what was then the Pac-10, and began to see things that were just suspect and not right. And now that I've been years out, I still see things that are suspect and not right. And so whether it's just the health and safety of college athletes, I still now know people that are spending money out of their own pocket, paying for injuries that they sustained while making millions of dollars for the university. Whether it's people who have come up a few credits shy of graduating because they were giving 80 plus hours a week to their sport, and now they have to go into their own pocket to try to come back and get that college degree. I see perverse incentives where there's no enforceable protocols. So say concussion, when a game is on the line, millions of dollars on the line, all the incentives is to push athletes beyond what is their safety. There are a lot of issues to me that are just wrong and that endanger the well-being of college athletes, the education of college athletes, as well as their physical health. And for years, I've had that frustration, and now somehow pinch myself. It seems like yesterday, but suddenly I'm a United States Senator, and one of the handful that actually played Division I NCAA sports, and it's something that I think needs to be corrected. And so me and Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut with some other Senate colleagues worked on something that we call the College Athletes' Bill of Rights that addresses all these issues. That if you talk to any sports fan who loves college sports, when you tell them these kind of things, they often are stunned that this isn't just the basic floor that should be a part of the experience that everyone has. Not to mention the fact that people, when they realize that this is a $15 billion industry, it's the only industry I know of in America in this great free market where the people that are contributing to the most of the creation of those profits get to share in none of it. And so we have a great bill that we're excited, that is the College Athletes' Bill of Rights, and we're just looking forward to trying to find a way that this institution that I'm a part of, Congress, that gives a lot of antitrust exemptions to the NCAA, begins to ask for basic health and safety standards and better assurances than the NCAA has been giving right now to their college athletes.
Thank you very much for that, Senator. I think a lot of us would like to ask you questions. I'll dive in first. One of the things we've been talking about, of course, is the student athlete. We're focusing more on athlete than student, and we want to give these athletes an opportunity, of course, over time to graduate. Where do you stand on mandating lifetime scholarships, or a 6-year or until graduation kind of scholarship versus the, as Howard was saying, the threat of 1 year after the next year after the next year, which of course creates all kinds of problems and tensions for that young athlete?
Yeah, to me, I mean, my personal feeling very strongly is there should be lifetime scholarships. That if this is a person who is contributing so much, that there should be an understanding that we spend a lot of hours on our sport when we're there. I can't tell you how many hours on films, how many hours in the weight room. And again, when we measured, when I was playing, if you include travel to and from across the country to South Bend, Indiana, we would go, or even just Southern California. And when you include that all in, it was more than 80 hours a week. So I'm just a big believer that people should have pathways to get their degrees. Frankly, I'm a big believer that they should be allowed to do graduate work as well at the universities. It's a way, if you're not compensating them for the millions of dollars that they're bringing into the university, the least you can do is give them an academic scholarship to enable them to have a pathway to secure their education.
Senator Howard Bryant here. I just wanted to ask you a quick question on participation. As you're creating this Bill of Rights, and there is sort of a blank slate here, what is your position on having some form of, whether it's unionization, council, something where the actual athletes are contributing to the actual language of this new world we're about to go into?
So again, to treat these athletes, these leaders, these phenomenal artists of athleticism as children is wrong. I believe they should have a seat at the table to be able to help chart their own course and shape the context in which they work and sacrifice, and in many cases bleed and sweat. And that's a problem, not to have athletes' voices at the table shaping the policies that so dramatically affect their lives. And so I'm a person that believes, number one, I believe in union and union organizing, but there's a lot of tension, I know, around calling them employees and all that. I still think you could even avoid that by creating some mechanism by which that they have a seat at the table. Because you all know the old saying that if you don't have a seat at the table, then you're going to be on the menu. And the way that athletes are often eaten up by the system shows you a lack of their voices being taken seriously and being valued and actually engaging and getting their input.
And especially also during COVID, I thought this was even more revelatory, because I think that COVID scared the daylights out of professional sports and absolutely out of college sports. But one of the things that happened in 2020, we just kept asking the question, if there's nobody on campus, why are the players on campus?
Yeah, again, because it is not about the health and safety of our players. It's about the profit that these sports generate. And I'm sorry, I've seen this around our nation, is that the profit motive will often supersede the safety and security of people doing the work. We saw it in the meatpacking industry, where literally we had a president that used the Defense Production Act to secure that industry from lawsuits, because so many people were dying at work that they found a way to make sure that the corporation was insulated from legitimate lawsuits. And so I'm sorry, this is a massive business, college athletics. And the people, again, that are literally at times in the fields doing the work, their well-being is not often a central factor or a central concern. And without their voices at the table, without them having any kind of leverage, you often see what we see right now, that we still have college athletes, not in the pros, but college athletes dying during workouts from heat exhaustion and things like that don't happen in pro sports, but where they have a voice, but they happen in college sports, and it's unacceptable to me.
Tammi, did you want to?
Yes, Senator, thank you so much for being with us. Tammi Gaw, I notice in the framework, I'm very excited to see things about the establishment of a medical trust fund and enforceable health and safety standards. That's, as a former athletic trainer, that's very important to me. How do you see, obviously, the fact that we live under a health insurance system instead of a health care system? You know, this is a thing, a uniquely American issue that we have to deal with as far as sports. How do you see, or what would be your goal on how we can provide long-term care, even beyond the 5 years or things like that, for injuries that will pop up or be carry-ons from injuries suffered in sports?
Yeah, look, it is a health insurance problem. Is how do you give what I'd like to see is lifetime insurance, because of what we're learning about CTE, spinal injuries, and more. Not to mention, again, some of my friends who are at least 300-pound linemen are having knee problems now, or joint problems. This is something we could figure out, and it's something that we do in the private sector, that there are actuarials that you can create a fund that can be contributed to that is a small fraction of the profits that the NCAA and sports teams see. Small fraction. If we are really, and sports fans would want this, if we are first and foremost about the health, safety, and well-being, then create this fund. Because as I travel around the country right now and see some of these facilities that people are spending millions of dollars and what they're spending on, and you're telling me you're literally allowing this, whatever indoor fountain, and you can't provide a little bit of money for a fund to make sure that somebody with traumatic brain injury gets the care that they need. It's ridiculous, the warped priorities we have here, and the arms race that we have, which I've had people in the college sports world tell me, God, we wish we had some kind of restrictions on coaching salaries or how much we're spending on facilities and amenities, because it's an arms race now of trying to attract college athletes, that we're spending so much money on these things. So it's a warped set of priorities. The fundamental first thing that we should be concerned about is the health and safety of these athletes, and it's just not the case, and it's not that hard to figure out.
Senator, what is the response that you're getting from your colleagues? Because I tend to disagree slightly about when you say that sports fans want this, because I sense a great deal of callousness from the sports public toward the athletes. Well, nobody put a gun to your head to go do this, right? I mean, so what is the response that you're getting from your colleagues?
No, I respect the slight disagreement. And let me just philosophically say to you that when we don't think things through, like, I'm really happy to wear the clothing I'm wearing right now. I'm not aware if this was made by child labor. I'm not aware if this was made with toxic chemicals that are poisoning our atmosphere. I like the jacket that I'm wearing. But once I become conscious of stuff, my empathy grows. And as a consumer, I don't want stuff that's going to kill dolphins or poison people or being made with child labor. I have an infinite faith in the goodness of humanity. I really do. And so when you stop and explain and counter the wrong-headed ideals often of what a college athlete's life is like, and give folks a dose of truth, that breaks open empathy and understanding and caring. And so I agree with you that a lot of folks just have a wrong understanding of what it is to be a college athlete, but I do trust folks enough to know that, hey, here's a kid that has a concussion that's sent back into a game because the game is on the line and ends up with a lifetime permanent brain damage. Shouldn't there be accountability for that? People are like, yeah, you're right. Here's a person that was pushed in order to compete for their position. They're battling for starting position, is pushed to put in more and more hours where they make the rational choice that I'm not going to study, I'm going to study film. And by the way, my playbook was more complicated than some of the classes I took. People seem to have a lot more compassion and empathy when you put that in line. Here's a university that's making millions of dollars. So I hear what you're saying, but I have faith that college sports fans ultimately do care if they know the facts, but right now they don't. And there's a fiction that's told. There is a fiction that's told about college athletics that's being publicized. A story, look, in the history of America, I was the most overrated high school football player ever. I mean, I was a two-position high school All-American. USA Today, me and Emmett Smith were on the same USA Today All-American team. He went for the life of glamour and the pros. I went to serve the people. Emmett, come on, man. But the reality is, I was told that the fairy tale everywhere I went, the story about college athletics, that when I got there and started seeing things, it just didn't make sense. I still remember a big name college football coach recruited me to go to one school. He transfers to another school where he gets millions of dollars more, and then calls me up to try to get me to go to that school. But the kids that were recruited by him the year before didn't have the same freedoms. There's all these kind of things that just don't add up. So I want to expose as much of this as possible, because I believe the truth works. Look, Shabazz Napier, this guy at an NCAA tournament tells the truth that there are a lot of college athletes back then especially that couldn't even afford food, went to bed hungry, shamed the NCAA because once it was exposed, people said that makes no sense, and the rules were changed suddenly. The NCAA is an institution that talks about change a lot, but it really often doesn't do so until they're publicly shamed and people realize the truth of what's going on.
Senator, go ahead. Yes,
How you doing, Senator Booker? Brendan Cole here.
Hey, Brendan.
So I really like what you said about the fictional, people have this fictional view on things, and coming from an HBCU, I think this is a huge one. Like with Deion Sanders.
You can't just say I'm from a HBCU.
I'm from the HBCU, Hampton University.
Thank you very much, man.
I appreciate that. You got me while I was slacking. I'm slacking. And so my thing is, and I love the bill. I really do. And like I was saying, Deion Sanders has brought this new light on the HBCUs. I mean, it's the cool thing. They're getting sponsors. They're getting on ESPN, all these things. But that's a fiction in a lot of ways. Like, yes, his star power has brought that, but a lot of HBCUs do not see this same national recognition. They're not recognized nationally. We don't have the funding. You want to talk about going to sleep hungry? Our CAF closed at 6 p.m. on the weekends, and you had to figure it out after that. And so my thing, where I'm going with this is, I always wonder, what about the assistant coaches at HBCU levels, right? Like, we don't deal with the coaches making $60 million or anything. Like I was saying earlier, we have coaches that make $60,000 a year and on a one-year deal. And so I look at, if scholarships were given to us, lifetime scholarships, which I agree with and I think we deserve, I do think there has to be a change on the other side too to help these coaches get more stability, to where they're like, okay, I'm offering this kid the opportunity. I can't have the mindset of, if I don't win this year, I'm getting kicked out of my apartment because I'm gonna lose my job. I think that we should have, some stability there that gives us some stability so we can work together, and it's not like they're getting jealous of us, if that makes sense. What do you think of that?
Look, I think the economic equation in sports is not working for everyone, and that there's enough money in this industry to treat the workers in the industry fairly. And it's not just the athletes, as you're saying. There are a lot of assistant coaches that have a really tough deal, and in my opinion, they're not being paid for the value that they're bringing. And anybody who's played sports knows that at its best, some of these assistant coaches, I had assistant coaches from Brian Billick to Tyrone Willingham. These are real big influences in your life. They're making a huge difference to the young men and women that they're coaching. And so I hear you loud and clear. Our bill does not address that, but we should be having a conversation about the fullness of the people that contribute to the success of an industry like college sports.
Senator Booker, we would love to have a few members of the audience, if you have a few more minutes, ask a couple questions.
I was told there were going to be questions about my football career, because the older I get, the better I was.
Those are the zingers that, as veteran journalists, we wait till the end.
When
the screen goes blank.
I want to talk about my touchdown against USC. It's one of my, one of my finer moments.
We'll leave you plenty of time for that. Before we go to questions, though, Title IX, obviously 50th anniversary, huge event coming up next month. 90% of universities and colleges are not in compliance with Title IX. I realize your bill is not focused on that, but as a senator, what would you have to say about that, about the abysmal rate of compliance on such an important law?
No, I put on my reading glasses, which my receiving coach said I needed glasses for the passes I dropped. But I'm putting it on because, we actually are trying to, in this most recent version, to include more about gender equity in the Bill of Rights. And in the updated version, it includes provisions to bolster compliance with and enforceability of Title IX, because there is a lot of lip service given to it, but it is, as we've seen, in fact, has been exposed by people like Sedona Prince, who showed the differences in the NCAA facilities during the tournament. So we are very conscious of that, and I think the Title IX has done so much. We should celebrate it during this anniversary, but what we really should be doing is how to give it more teeth and more enforceability, because colleges and universities around our country are not in full compliance.
Thank you. We do have a question. Please go ahead.
Yes, Senator Booker, your bill had a revenue share at one time. I don't know if it's still in there. If it's still in there, how did you come up with that number, and do you see any issues with that moving forward?
Yeah, I have not given up on the idea of revenue sharing. It's not in the bill. It was one of the more controversial parts as I try to build bipartisan support for it. So it's not in this most recent version. The two changes, one is Title IX enforceability, one is pulling out the revenue sharing. But I'm not giving up on that. I feel very passionate that in this $15 billion industry, young people on our courts and our fields that are producing this wealth, that these are some of the highest potential revenue years of their lives, that this is one industry that they're denied the ability to share in the profits that they're creating. So as a capitalist, as a free market person, I believe strongly that this is a violation of the values of the free market, and that we should be advocating for that. But I'm also a realpolitik guy, and this is not a part of the current Bill of Rights right now.
Thank you. And we have another question over. No, whoa. Hang on.
Yes.
Well, let's right.
Microphones.
Right.
As,
said a second.
as Tammi knows, as a fellow member of the board, I am a big fan of college club sports. That has not been mentioned here at all in this discussion. So I'm asking Tammi and also Senator Booker, how do you deal with the issues of physical and mental health issues that are involved in college club sports? Now, if you look at college club sports, they're very much like high school sports. They're not interested in revenue generation. Recruiting is not involved. There are not admission waivers, things like that going on. So it's more a pure kind of amateur athletics going on in college, and it's booming. The college club sports are growing phenomenally, but there's no protection for them. They're like another student extracurricular activity. The recruiting is done by the students themselves. I think that's a great model. They tend to have volunteer coaches,
Sure,
so
we've
there are
got
no
that.
high-paid coaches.
Thank you. Well, Senator Booker, the club teams, the intramural teams. I mean, you want all students to be able to have those opportunities. Where does that fit in this ecosystem of sports?
Look, I hate to. You guys I'm very humble. You keep trying to force me to talk about my athletic prowess, and I am the only member in all of Congress who was a starting member of a national championship basketball team. You didn't part that in my introduction. It was the British national championship when I played for Oxford University. They just spot you like 10 points if you have an American on the team. But it was like club sports. I want to tell you this. I love sport. I think it's one of the most profound aspects of American culture, from Little League all the way to people playing in over 50 leagues in club sports. I can't speak to the particulars at universities, but we have a real sports crisis in this country. And part of it is because more and more your participation in sports is coming down to how much money your family has. And I look at sports access now, and there are so many sports around America that kids are not playing because they can't afford either the costs, because now schools are charging for participation in a lot of sports because they don't have access to a diversity of sports, whether it's tennis or golf or what have you. And I think we as a culture, we have to think, if we value this, we should try to be removing barriers for more participation at every level to sports, not to mention the fact that we are a nation that's dying from diet-related diseases. We're seeing explosions in diabetes, explosions in obesity, heart problems, hypertension. Even Alzheimer's is reflected to not just diet, but also exercise. And so we are, and we won't be able to afford this. If you look at the curve of the explosion of diet-related diseases, we are not going to be able to afford it in 25 years. It's going to bankrupt our country because of the medical costs. Well, an antidote to that, besides making fresh, healthy foods more available, is also that is leaning into that culture of physical activity and athleticism. And so this is something we have to face. I haven't thought much about club sports in college, but I have thought a lot about, in fact, I have a bill about trying to expand access for people to participate in sports, because it is still, to me, one of the great aspects of our culture that is healthy, that builds community, that breaks down bonds, barriers between us. My football locker room, I would die for those guys, and there were Republicans, Democrats, there were people of all different faiths. Something about getting with somebody, sweating with them, playing on a common team reminds you of your common humanity, as well as making you a more vibrant and healthy individual.
I think we have another question. Do we have one over here?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay. This is for the entire panel.
Could we focus on the senator? I apologize.
Oh,
since
okay.
We've got his time, and we're very
Okay.
fortunate to
Senator
have it.
Booker, my name is Mark Hyman. I'm the director of the Povich Center for Sports Journalism at the University of Maryland. Our students recently completed an investigation of Title IX and high school sports. And one of the stories in that package underscored the lack of movement in Congress on legislation that would create more robust reporting requirements on Title IX at the high school level. I wondered if you could talk about that.
Look, you put that squarely on the feet of somebody that should be doing more about it, and somebody who's a member of Congress. Title IX is this extraordinary piece of legislation that has contributed so much to all of American culture, but it is not being enforced in the way it should at every level. And so it's something that we're fighting for in my office. I would love to see this report and get all the facts. I'm sure you can expand my understandings of what's going on at the high school level. But if we are really committed to these ideals and principles, it's not enough to have flowery words on a piece of paper. We need to make them have teeth and be binding. And so I want to learn more, and if I can get that information, I know my team will follow up.
So I think do you have time, Senator, for one more question before we get to your incredible college career? Is it last question?
Yeah.
Okay, here we
Hi.
go.
While we're bragging, I was the 1987 archery champion for Camp Stratterman. I just thought I should bring that up. Thank you.
You should. You should.
No, but seriously, my actual question is, I think we're kind of dancing around the NCAA and the role that they play, and a lot of these ideas about a college Bill of Rights, a college athlete Bill of Rights. Where do you think the NCAA is with that? What role should they be playing, and are they even part of this conversation anymore?
I mean, they have to be a part of the conversation. They're a membership organization. I feel sorry for the head of the NCAA sometimes, because it's worse than herding cats. I mean, it's you have all these member organizations. You have to move with consensus and participation. So it's a difficult organization. But in my opinion, that should not excuse their lack of ability to create enforceable standards and rules that protect the well-being of college athletes. I would love to see a movement, whether by Congress, to study this issue more. The NCAA is an outgrowth of an original effort starting at a past president who saw so many people dying in the sport of football that he called together colleges and universities, literally saved the game, but also created what eventually became the NCAA. Again, created to protect college athletes. And so I believe they have not fulfilled their mandate. And the stories that you hear are painful when you see what college athletes are going through, how they're being exploited, taken advantage of, often left without an education, without their full health, and often we don't talk enough about athletes' mental health. So I would love to see a real movement to re-examine the NCAA, maybe strengthen it so it has more teeth and is not at the behest of individual member bodies. Again, I have faith in humanity, as I said. have fierce allegiance to the idea of sport, but I know we are better than what we are seeing right now. And if more people don't start talking about it, we are going to continue to see eras of exploitation, of discrimination on the basis of gender, of people suffering in silence and at the margins because of mental health or physical injuries. And these ideals that we use, the Disney version that we tell people about securing an education, will still fall short of that because people will be exploited for their athletic gifts and not allowed to nurture their intellectual gifts. This is an obligation. If you're a person that buys a ticket, has a favorite school, enjoys sport, and you are allowing yourself not to be curious enough to understand the truth of what's going on, then you're part of the problem. In some ways, you're being complicit in the status quo. We all have an obligation to improve the outcomes and the experiences of people that are engaging in sports. And ultimately, that's going to help us as a nation even, not just to have these incredible so-called amateur athletes, but it's going to help us as a nation better fulfill our democratic principles and ideals, create, as one of my former colleagues who's now passed away said, called us a more beloved community in which we really care about each other, invested in each other, and ultimately want each other to have thriving high levels of well-being.
Well, what a perfect way to end. Senator Booker, thank you so much for your time and your leadership. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Send my highlight films for you to show later on.
Thank you again, sir. Really appreciate your time. And to the panel, thank you as well.